please welcome UCLA Chancellor Gene Block.
Good evening. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to historic Royce Hall for this very special evening. I'd like to begin by thanking all of those who've been instrumental in making this evening possible. This event was truly a labor of love on the part of many people and organizations throughout UCLA, the students and staff, alumni and administrators, and more. I should mention specifically Student Affairs, Alumni Relations, External Affairs, and Government and Community Relations. In addition to the vision and leadership of Robert and Helen Singleton and Council Member Robert Farrell, we should acknowledge the indispensable role played by the African Student Union, the African Women's Collective, the African Men's Collective, and the Undergraduate Students Association Council, USAC. Indeed, I'm delighted to report that USAC adopted a resolution this past Tuesday commemorating and honoring the UCLA Freedom Riders. Many of you were here in this hall last year when we paid tribute to the Forgotten Four, including two UCLA pioneers who helped integrate professional football. Tonight, we welcome again everyone here to pay tribute to an extraordinary group of 16 UCLA students, male and female, black and white, who helped to secure the fundamental right to travel our nation free from racial discrimination. More than 5 decades ago, these brave Bruins put themselves on the front lines in a nonviolent struggle for equality and freedom. The struggle in 1961 was focused on the desegregation of interstate transportation. And our 16 Bruin heroes joined a larger group of some 400 freedom riders in this noble and dangerous cause. They risked jail, physical injury, and even death. And yet the freedom riders stood resolute in their cause. We salute and honor them for their conviction. On April 27th, 1965, in a speech delivered right here on campus at the base of Jan Steps, just a month after the historic march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said, "There are some things so dear, some things so precious, some things so eternally true that they're worth dying for. And if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live." Well, our Bruin Freedom Riders had discovered something worth dying for, and they made this country a better place in that process, so it's fitting that we honor them tonight. But we want to do more than that this evening. We'll hear from some of them and learn from them, because the lessons they have to teach us not only belong to a bygone era, perhaps in the middle of the 20th century, these are lessons that apply with equal force and timely relevance to American society today in the second decade of the 21st century. We still face injustice, we still face inequality, we still sadly are not all truly free. But we can learn from history, particularly from those who are bound together by a boundless determination to right society's wrongs. There's much we can learn from those whose foresight, courage, and discipline served as a model of the principled and peaceful activism that opened minds, changed laws and hearts, and helped to forge a better America. The journey to change we take tonight is both backward-glancing and forward-focused. We'll be discussing both the Freedom Rides and Ferguson, and much that has happened in between. As we honor the 16 UCLA Freedom Riders, there's one more hero we should recognize, Janie McKinney, and she is a UCLA staff member who at the age of 12 rushed to the aid of freedom fighters who were under vicious assault by white supremacists in front of her home in Anniston, Alabama. Janie, would you please stand so we can acknowledge you? Thank you, Janie. At this time, I would like to recognize the 6 Bruin Freedom Riders who have passed away. Albert Barreau, William Leons, Carol Gary Barber, Michael Grubbs, Steve McNichols, and Sam Townsend. We honor their legacy, and we understand that several family members of these 6 Freedom Riders are here this evening. Would you please stand and accept our appreciation on behalf of your loved ones? We are very pleased that the 10 UCLA Freedom Riders still remain, and I'll begin with the names of those who could not be here this evening. Michael Wolfson, Marilyn Eisenberg, Winston Fuller, and Alan Kaufman. Let's please give them a round of applause. We're extremely delighted that several UCLA Freedom Riders are here this evening with us. So when you hear your name, I would appreciate if you could stand and remain standing so we could recognize all of you. Robert Singleton. And Helen Singleton. Robert Farrell, Max Pavesic, Joseph Gerbac, and Philip Posner. Let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you. We're very proud, all very proud of these courageous Bruins. They're great role models for UCLA students today, and indeed for students and concerned citizens everywhere. We take great pride in the fact that UCLA students and alumni are actively engaged in pressing social issues. Bruins have always used their talent, their education, and their intellect to change the world. UCLA students have always been public-spirited and community-minded. They are driven by a powerful ethic of service to improve society, both for the benefit of our society today, but also for future generations. One thing we know from the Freedom Riders, meaningful social change does not come easily. It comes about only through courage, determination, sacrifice, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. But tonight is more than a celebration of courage and conscience. Let it also serve as a renewed call to action and social change. Tonight is more than a well-deserved journey into the past. I hope it will also mark a beginning of a much-needed journey to a future society that is more inclusive, more compassionate, and more just. With that, I welcome all of you again to this very special evening. Thank you for being here.
Please welcome Professor Cheryl Harris, Gilbert Foundation Chair in Civil Rights and Civil Liberties at the UCLA School of Law and Interim Chair of the African American Studies Department.
Thank you all for being here. I am particularly proud to be here in both capacities as a member of the law faculty as well as the interim chair of African American Studies, particularly so because after 38 years as an interdepartmental program, we have finally graduated and become a department. I particularly want to thank the Chancellor and to Yanina Montero and all of the staff and people involved for doing the important work of remembering. And in that spirit, I want to ask if we could take a moment to remember those who were part of the struggle but who have passed away. The Chancellor just mentioned their names, but I'm going to repeat them again, and we're going to take a moment of silence. It's Carol Gary Barber, Albert Baruch, Steve McNichols, Michael Grubbs, William Leons, and Sam Townsend. The history of the Freedom Rides goes back to the early struggles against segregation in public transportation. Segregation in public transportation was part of an entire system, one both public and private, political and social, imposed by law and by custom. It came to be understood as right and necessary. Segregation was also a nation-building project, a way in which the national identity was consolidated as white. So from its inception, at the same time segregation was installed, it was both resisted. It was resisted through law, and it was resisted despite of it. And even before emancipation, racial exclusions on public transport were vigorously resisted and objected to. Frederick Douglass, among others, defied the segregated rail cars in Massachusetts and was forcibly removed after refusing to go to the Jim Crow car. In his view, these ride-ins, as he called them, were an important part of focusing public attention on segregation and publicly shaming the companies for their practices. So by 1843, the railroads in Massachusetts were desegregated. Of course, this was not the case everywhere, and famously in Louisiana, the Separate Car Act of 1890 was challenged by Homer Plessy. Plessy argued that segregation on trains in interstate transportation was a violation of equal protection. The backdrop to that case, however, was a series of acts of civil disobedience by individuals, many of them black women, who challenged their exclusion from the first-class car, which was also called the ladies' car. This was more than a dignitary harm for these women, because in addition to being subjected to the filthy cars and inadequate facilities that they offered, black women and children restricted to the second-class car were placed in harm's way as white men entered the second-class car specifically to do things that they could not do in the first-class ladies' cars. This led to sexual assault and beatings of black women, and thus many of the early cases were brought by them. For 60 long years, Plessy's separate but equal standard masked the reality of racial oppression and violence. It was certainly separate, but there was nothing about it that was equal. The social movements that emerged from the early 1960s, like the Congress of Racial Equality, who was the sponsor of the early Freedom Rides, was part of the long civil rights struggle, what historian Jacqueline Dowd Hall calls the long civil rights struggle, that resisted not only America's version of apartheid, but that understood and made visible the connections between that system and systems of labor exploitation in both rural and urban settings, both domestic and abroad. Black people in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, through art, through music, formal political protest, and everyday acts of resistance, refused to accept their station. Through figures such as W.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Paul Robeson, and others, they connected to anti-colonial movements in Africa through Pan-Africanism, forming the backbone of struggles for workers' rights like equal wages, both inside and outside workers' organizations, unions movements. They were both productive and constitutive members, even as they had contested relationships with organizations like the Communist Party. From the anti-lynching movement led by women like Ida B. Wells to the 1951 petition to the United Nations, We Charge Genocide, signed by Paul Robeson and William Patterson, black people resisted. The petition charging genocide before the UN specified, among other evidence, the strict racial segregation in every aspect of American life. It also recounted the violence encountered by black people, both at the hands of the police and the state, as well as by private parties who were allowed to literally get away with murder. The gross inequalities in access to public accommodation were also part of that charge. They appealed to the United Nations to intervene because of the failure of local or federal authorities to protect black life. And indeed, the state itself was one of the major instruments of black oppression. The petition argued that the circumstances of black people in the United States amounted to genocide under the convention. This petition did not succeed, but it raised the issue of the racist subjugation of black people as a matter of international human rights, much to the embarrassment of the United States, which held itself out as the protector of democracy. As the petition noted, one of the many aspects of institutionalized violence that black people encountered was the lack of equal access to public accommodations and transportations. As the challengers to the Separate Car Act in Plessy noted, this was an important place of struggle. Why public transportation? Because it's the place that you encounter every day. It's where you go back and forth to work. It's how you conduct your business. and the indignities as well as the dangers encountered by Black people in that space, as well as the constantly shifting, completely arbitrary and capricious constraints on their movement, were a constant source of the reminder of their second-class status. The legal challenge to Plessy in the courts, of course, finally produced Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, mandating the desegregation of public schools with all deliberate speed. The implementation of this command, however, has proved elusive, and it certainly did in its immediate wake. Organized white resistance, supported by the state and initially by inaction by the federal government, produced repeated acts of violence and coercion against those who sought to enforce what the Supreme Court had ruled. Similarly, in connection with segregation in public transportation, legal victories did not lead to actual results on the ground, with some notable exceptions. While the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955, which lasted a year and cost the transit company significant economic losses, while that boycott finally produced a legal ruling that ended formal segregation, equal access to other arenas was still denied. The sit-ins at the lunch counters of the Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina, that began in 1960 were the beginning of the movement that we now understand and is often marked formally as the civil rights movement. But I recount the information before to try to bring forth the fact that there is a long arc to struggle, and what happened in 1960 had been built on the work and struggles of the past. The sit-ins at the lunch counter deployed nonviolent tactics to challenge the longstanding custom of restaurants, hotels, and places of public accommodations that refused to serve Black patrons. And it was students who put their bodies on the line and later formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee with the critical assistance of veteran civil rights organizer Ella Baker. While the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, headed by Martin Luther King, was hoping that SNCC would be its youth wing, SNCC declined to do so and insisted on standing on its own. The membership of SNCC became actively involved with the Freedom Rides, which had been organized by the Congress on Racial Equality, headed by James Farmer. CORE itself had been founded in the 1940s and came out of a pacifist movement, which had specifically sought to apply and draw on Mahatma Gandhi's principles of nonviolent disobedience to seek social change. By the time the 1960s roll around, CORE had organized chapters in many cities. And in '61, James Farmer organized what he called the Freedom Rides. The Freedom Rides were designed to push to enforce a 1960 Supreme Court case called Boynton versus Virginia. That case involved a Black law student, William Boynton, who traveled by bus at Christmas time from Washington, D.C. to Birmingham, Alabama. When the bus stopped in Richmond, Virginia for a rest stop, Boynton went to the terminal to get something to eat and seated himself in the white area of the restaurant at the terminal. When he was asked to move, he refused, showing his ticket as a person traveling interstate. He was arrested, convicted, and fined for unlawfully remaining on the premises. Boynton contended that his arrest and conviction violated the Constitution, both due process and equal protection, and he also said it violated something called the Commerce Clause, which grants exclusive power to the national government to regulate the travel and movement of goods and people between the states. Boynton won his case, but not based on the Constitution. Instead, the court reached for federal law, the Interstate Commerce Act, to find that the conviction was unlawful. In that sense, the decision finding for Boynton was a victory, but it also signaled in some important ways the way in which the courts and the law sought to limit and contain protest. In later years, including protest involving Martin Luther King's demonstrations in Birmingham, the court made the protection of order more important than the protection of speech and ruled against the demonstrators. In time, the court came to focus not only on whether the protests were peaceful, but whether they were, quote, disrupting business as usual or invading what the court called, quote, hallowed places. This reflected and reinforced what Louis Steele, an NAACP lawyer, described in a 1968 piece in the New York Times. It reflected what he called, quote, that white America decided that demonstrations and riots are synonymous. After Boynton, CORE went south with a group of men and women to challenge segregation in bus terminals, and they were met with violence. When they got to Anniston, Alabama, one of the buses was firebombed, and a mob attacked the rioters. Similarly, in Birmingham and in Montgomery, the rioters were violently assaulted by white mobs. Diane Nash, a Black woman student in Nashville, was among the student leaders who determined to finish what had been started. She was a leader in SNCC and a person close with SCLC. She had begun attending nonviolent training workshops led by Reverend James Lawson. This triggered a national call to action both through CORE as well as SNCC and other civil rights organizations. And so people on campuses as well as off, ordinary people, said, we've had enough. Some of those people were students here at UCLA. Many of them were activists, but all of them were committed to resistance to injustice. And we are honored today to have them here, to honor them for their work, and most importantly, to hear from them and engage with them about this history, not as another pillar in a museum in which the past is safely contained, but as a critical intervention in a period of crisis and protest over the failure to hold accountable those who act with the power or the sanction of the state to unjustifiably kill and violently oppress Black life. This event is called Journey to Change, from the Freedom Rides to Ferguson, but it could have easily been called from the Freedom Rides to Los Angeles, where Ezell Ford was stopped by the police for walking in his neighborhood and ultimately shot multiple times, including in the back of his head. His murder has not yet been prosecuted, and even if there is an indictment, we know now through bitter experience that this too may mean very little. How are we to understand the past in the light of the challenges of the present? How are the conditions and the challenges different? How are they similar? We look forward to engaging these crucial questions with our panel of Freedom Riders and with you. Thank you so much.
Please welcome Professor James Roberson, John Lee Tunstall, and the award-winning UCLA Gospel Choir.
Till earth and heaven
please welcome UCLA undergraduate Kamil Fields, who has prepared a special spoken word performance for tonight's program.
Hello. Just quick for everyone, this piece was specially written for tonight after hearing some of the Freedom Riders speak and just doing a little research and just, sitting with how I resonated personally with the struggle for revolution and really our own battle to liberate our own minds. And as Angela Davis said, liberate our societies as well. So this is just a reflection of that. Dear Mama, I know we moved here from Georgia, thankfully. Single mother, 2 children westbound, beyond education which ignored my brown, you presented an escape from a surrounding fate for my sister and me. But I'm going home. Mama, don't try and stop me. I'm going on this ride. Years before conception, I was given the keys. Fueled by knowledge, readily recognizing lies, I've risen through school. Highest education, unjust laws bluntly abide. Stoked, black bodies send signals through the smoke of our demise. No attempt to harmonize, 10 years removed from the South, yet every day on campus I see crystallized Confederate flags gleaming in gentrifying eyes. Ducks that drop drips of pain, sown silence of colored lips relived through past trips of us being supremely slain. Progressively acting past the pain, I pack my bag with trial-sized truth. Part of the continuum of youth, soldiers of stigmatic combat grabbing back, handfuls of black pearls stolen after being thrown to swine, reclaiming the self too often colored in bright wine, unstringing a system beaded by the souls of the diaspora intertwined, momentum rediscovered, destination uncovered, revolution realigned. The divine, our perspectives rendition, students of revolutionary degree, practitioners of pedagogical passion, graduating beyond submission, validated by Plessy versus one of many Fergusons to come. Work is regular wage war, I ride for housing I can't afford, my people freed from the 9-to-5 conundrum, grasping for oxygen like liberty, gravity wrestles civil war sea, Babylon's red tide, white supremacy will not subside. Us. The movement molders, defeating disservice through actions of purpose. I give my life to the cause, but I am not a pen to be knocked down senselessly. Self-induced, labor-produced. Mike died because he was brown. Devalued, unquantified bodies that lie face down for hours in the streets. Beams of blackness streams, retreat in your privilege and still be confronted by our screams. Mama, what do I even begin to say to my unborn son? If I'm not here during his stay, explain that blackberries bloom on Eden's branches every day, picked, unable to see the battle won. I'll tell him to think of core. The down citizens multiplied radical wealth and dividends, delved into Bama, Birmingham, and Anniston, bus trips with no guarantee of another day in flesh and skin. How many riders does it take to rekindle a conscious light that's out? But the candles that burn at both ends, we live and learn twice as fast, protesting life throughout, forever time-stamped, testimonials and terminals along the way, Anglo-Saxon only, black codes break away. Simi Valley, I walk through you, carrying the spirits of 1961, the 4th of May. Birmingham riots sets afire, mentalities of silence, mobs of vicious vigilantes destroy our vehicles of nonviolence. Audrey, Lord, have mercy. If I did not ride for myself, I would be crushed under the ideas of others and run over alive. But Mama did raise a matriarch, birth to a black spark, revolution with ancestral manuals, Noah built with faith in granules, built burning our buses in lust. But no, to all of us, freedom today and always is a must. New Orleans, Washington, South Carolina, Mississippi, Bama, Montgomery, Birmingham, Atlanta, G, and Louisiana. States elevated by riots and rides against hatred. We needed backup to convince Kennedy to see us. The 400 Freedom Riders against segregation rose to effect a national navigation. They left this campus to free us. So, Mama, I'm not writing for a corporate job, commerce ethically flawed, I'd rather lead. I get paid every time I see another person freed. I'll get my education while staying active where communities that need. Mama, Honestly, I'm a ride or die, but do trust I'm prepared to survive. The hate they give young infants fuels my very will to stay alive. Urgent action is my gift to provide. So please, please, if I fall before I arrive safe, I know that all of our lives held meaning each and every day. And that's what revolution is. Thank you.
And now, please welcome Darnell Hunt, Director of UCLA's world-famous Ralph J. Bunche Center for African American Studies and UCLA Professor of Sociology.
Thank you and good evening. The 1960s was a decade of great transformation and the long-standing struggle for Black liberation in America. In May of 1961, men and women of tremendous courage and moral conviction boarded buses bound for the belly of the beast. North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi. With their very presence, as my colleague Cheryl Harris so eloquently explained, the Freedom Riders challenged local laws and customs that had nurtured for so many generations the indignities of segregation and the violence of Jim Crow. Now, fast forward to the end of that decade, a new day was dawning on the intellectual front of the struggle. Black studies programs were springing up all over America. UCLA's own Center for the Study of Afro-American History and Culture was established in 1969 to enhance our understanding of the, quote, corrosive effects of American racism and to give students the tools to, quote, understand and control the forces and attitudes presently shaping their lives. Our center, of course, was renamed in 2003 after Dr. Ralph J. Bunche. Bunche was valedictorian of UCLA's 1927 class. He was the first African American to win a Nobel Prize. And he was a prolific scholar of the global politics of race. Many may not remember that in 1965, an ailing Bunche marched with Martin Luther King to Selma, a watershed moment in American race relations, dramatized so beautifully this year in a film by UCLA's own Ava DuVernay. And I'm so proud to note that our center's first director, Robert Singleton, with his wife Helen, of course, was part of the contingent of UCLA students who had joined the Freedom Rides earlier in the decade. We owe these courageous individuals an enormous debt of gratitude. They blazed a trail that we must continue to follow, be it the recent tragedies of Ferguson and Sanford, current racial disparities in wealth incarceration, or closer to home, our ongoing struggles to forge an inclusive and affirming campus racial climate here at UCLA. Our journey is far from over. It is now my great honor to welcome to the stage Los Angeles City Council President Herb Wesson and Assembly Member and Chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, Reginald Jones Sawyer.
Good evening. My name is Reginald Byron Jones Sawyer, Sr., and I am the new chair of the California Legislative Black Caucus. The reason that it is so significant and so historic, we now have 12 members of the legislature, more than we ever had in the history of the California State Legislature. And I'm also proud of this of what you're doing today. In my family, I am kind of the griot, the griot, the person that relays stories that have happened in the past. Some of you know, and many of you don't know, my uncle is Jefferson Thomas. He was one of the Little Rock Nine, one of the 9 kids that integrated Central High School in 1957. And the stories that they told me about the struggles my uncle went through just to go to high school, to the best high school in the country, are amazing. What they endured, what they went through, the beatings, the cross burnings, all of that obviously has some impact on a lot of African Americans, but especially on me, because not only it affected my grandfather, my grandmother, my aunts and uncles, it affected my mother. My mother, whose sole job every day was to clean my uncle's shirt. He wore a white shirt every day to school. And one day, he got hit in the head, beaten in the bathroom, and left for dead. And people did all sorts of unspeakable things to him in that shirt. My mother took that shirt and washed it, washed out the blood and all sorts of things unimaginable things in that shirt to make sure it was white again, so that he could put it on, go back to that school, and let them know that they would never, ever stop him from being able to get his education. And the reason why this is so important, the UCLA Freedom Riders, you need to hear their stories. You are so blessed to have them here. My uncle passed away about 2 years ago, and he can no longer give me the stories of what happened to him. You have treasures here right now that can tell you what happened in the past, but most important, to let you know that the past and the future are linked. What's happening in Ferguson and other places, they are connected to the past. Recently, in 2011, a state trooper who had confessed to killing a young 26-year-old African-American was recently released from prison after serving about 6 months. The reason it's a tragedy, because that person that he killed, his name was Jamie Lee Jackson, who was killed in 1965 during the Selma March. It took them over 40 years to prosecute him. And what did he say? The reason why he shot an unarmed black man is because he was in fear of his life. Isn't that ironic? We still hear those same admonitions today. That's why it's so important. Go ahead, clap. That is why it's so important that we not only honor and revere these people who come before us today, but we start to talk to them and learn from them so that when you take over from us graybeards over here, you can take us to the next level, because we depend on you to take us to a place that Martin Luther King always dreamed about. And that's why I'm honored to be here with my good friend, Council President Herb Wesson, to honor these people today. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie. I do not have a gray beard, and if I did, I'd dye it, okay? She finally got it. There are a lot of places that all of us could be tonight, and I'm so impressed with the number of students that are here tonight. Do me a favor and just give yourselves a round of applause. For Mr. Sawyer and myself, I don't think there is any other place that we'd like to be other than UCLA Royce Hall on this night to celebrate heroes. Heroes that actually changed the lives. I don't know if you read in the bio, I have had one of the most blessed lives that you could imagine. I, right in this very hall, was sworn in as the second African American to be Speaker of the California State Assembly. Elected unanimous to be the president, first black president of Los Angeles City Council. Do you really think that I could have done that without the sacrifices of these courageous people that will be honored tonight? We lived at a time when we heard these horror stories. My people are from Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, and Georgia. And did you know that as a child, I didn't go to the South until the 2004 presidential campaign. They would not allow me to go. I don't have the words to articulate our appreciation to each and every one of you. And the last thing that I will say to you, when you began to see this country become the great country that it is today, that's when all of us got together, regardless of the color of our skin, and we decided that we were going to make this country great. As long as you stay together, anything in this world is possible. And now it is your time to seriously engage in this struggle. It is your time, and I have every confidence that you will do that, and you will do that well. Now, Reggie, it's my understanding that we have work to do. Yes, we do. Let's work. And we go to work like a doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Singleton. Give him a round of applause. A hero. Where'd he? And he's still quick. And it's my understanding that we have certificates from the state and the city of Los Angeles. Ladies and gentlemen, let's rise for Helen Singleton. We've got an assembly line going on here. Reggie and I have known this man for probably 25 to 30 years. I didn't know that he was a freedom rider until a few years ago. So now it's my honor to present to you the former councilman from the 8th District, my friend and hero, Robert Bob Farrell. I know what you guys have going on. Philip Posner. Oh, no. We have Rabbi, or you are? I'm a rabbi. He is. And I mean, he told me, he showed me his card. He is a rabbi. Let's give him a round of applause. A man of God. Thank you for everything that you've done. I don't deserve it. No, you deserve that. Imagine getting in a bus, going somewhere that you've never been before, knowing that you're going to be confronted by people that don't like you much. Max, oh God, Max. Pavesic, Pavesic, Pavesic. I got it, I think. How are you, sir?
You were the big guy in the group. You're like, you could have played basketball.
They were lucky to have you.
That's what Helen said. That's great. Let me take that, and you can have a seat. Okay, very good.
All right, we gotta. You know what? Give Denise a round of applause. Give her a round of applause. Joseph Gerbac.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you.
We gotta take a photo.
All right, take a photo, Joseph. One more, Joseph. Thank you. We'll take this one.
On behalf of Williams Leones, we're going to have this, we're going to be able to present this to his wife. If you'd please come out, let's give Miss Leones a round of applause. Thank you for him.
Thank you for coming and accepting for him. Thank you. We're going to take that.
Reggie, make sure you assure them that they will receive those when they leave. A young man who did so much in such a little bit of time, 21 years old, helped change this world. His sister is here on his behalf. It's Albert Barreau. His sister is here, I believe. Rita Rubens, please come forward. Bye, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Please join us now in recognizing our UCLA Freedom Riders and congratulating them on this richly deserved honor. And now, please welcome back Professor Cheryl Harris, who will moderate a panel discussion featuring our Freedom Riders and their surviving family members.
Thank you. I really want to stress that we hope this will be a conversation. I've had the opportunity to talk with each of them on the phone, but I hope that this evening will allow us to really hear from their mouths how powerful an experience this was. So I'm going to start actually with you, Bob, and ask, what were the circumstances that led you and Helen to be involved in the ride? And maybe you can tell us something about what motivated you.
Yes. As a matter of fact, some of the people in the community, when I came to UCLA, are here tonight. And I'd like to give them a round of applause because they kept me and Bob Farrell attuned to what was going on in the rest of the country while we were trying to change things here in Westwood. When we got here in Westwood, Westwood had a number of characteristics that were similar to the South. There were racial covenants in the neighborhood. There were quotas in some of the apartment buildings. We didn't have all these dorms that we have up here now. And Bob Farrell and a couple of other friends of mine instigated me to run for, we wanted another guy to run for president of the NAACP at UCLA. He didn't show at the meeting. I was already had something called this SCBC, Southern California Boycott Committee. We were trying to change some of those things that were happening in Westwood, and we knew that this organization would help us. I ultimately ran instead of this guy, and I got elected. My platform was change in Westwood. And we found out very quickly that not everybody was in our favor in the administration. But we found also that the harder we pressed, the more we succeeded. We accomplished those changes faster than I thought we would. And it turned out, then we began to find out who were our friends, who was on our side, who were willing to work with us, and we started developing some coalitions. There's a gentleman here who I hope he doesn't mind me using his name. He was an ombudsman for years and years and years. His name is Donald Hartsock. He's out there, and I'd give him a round of applause. Reverend Hartsock was the person at the University Religious Conference who, whenever we had a need to have any kind of summit meeting, we had the whole University Religious Conference to. We ran up his telephone bill one time, I think $1 million, and but we paid it back. We had and through that, through all of those activities that we had, we developed more and more involvement from more and more students. And by the time the sit-ins occurred, we had a posse. And Helen was an art student, and so she gave us a lot of help in making picket signs that you could read. We did them over at the YWCA, which is no longer there, but it was that in the auditorium at YWCA, we would have these picket painting parties. And then we were picketing the Woolworth stores in sympathy with the students in the sit-ins in the South. Then, while we were doing that, and some of the people up here were picketing with us. All of the Freedom Riders were, to a large extent, populated by those picketing, and that'll take too long. And I don't want to take the whole time up here. I could go on and on and on.
And we would love to have you do that.
But the Freedom Rides occurred while we were still picketing the Woolworth stores, and everybody who was picketing the Woolworth stores with us, I was hoping we would all go. We had 40 names at one time, but only 15 of us or 16 of us went down.
So, Helen, I understand that you all left here and went through New Orleans, and then from New Orleans on to Jackson. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened where you went and what happened when you arrived?
We left Los Angeles by air. Delta Airlines was a new company at that time, and all of their employees were from Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. And I knew what we were going for, but I didn't expect to encounter the fear so soon. As soon as we got on the plane, all those Southern voices, the pilot, the stewardess, and even a little boy sitting next to me, all had these Southern drawls. And having grown up in the North but visited the South, I immediately felt surrounded by those people who I knew didn't care much for me. I felt like a soldier going into enemy territory right away, as soon as we left.
So what happened when you got to Jackson?
We walked Well, we went to New Orleans and got some more training in nonviolence and what we were told what to expect the next day. We were also told the night before, the Black Freedom Riders were told, don't go into town unless you have at least $1 in your purse or pocket, because you could be arrested for vagrancy, and they're looking for people to arrest. We were also told as a group not to go into town together because they didn't want us to get arrested before it was time to get arrested. But the next day, we got up and took the train from New Orleans to Jackson. And when we got off the train, there were men standing around with dark glasses on. I assume they were the FBI, but it turns out they were the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, which was an organization patterned after the FBI. They were plainclothesmen, but they're obviously who they were because they all had these dark glasses on. Anyway, we walked down the steps and into what I saw over the door was whites only. We went into that room, and I can tell you how I felt. I felt free. Free to walk into this room that these people are telling me I'm not good enough to walk into. I walked in on my own. Of course, I had my posse with me. And we were immediately told or asked to leave. And we didn't move. I felt the resolve in the room. We were committed to this. And this captain who, they turned out the chief of police, the captain of the police force, to arrest us. I mean, he must have thought we were dangerous. But anyway, I was struck by his uniform, quite frankly. It was really sharp. And it was a white jacket with all kinds of lapels and gold on it, and black pants, and he had on this hat. And I want to say that in 2001, we went back to Mississippi, and there was a chief of police again, and this time he was black.
With the same uniform.
So, same uniform.
Could I ask you, Helen, to tell us a little bit about what happened upon your arrest and where were you taken?
When we were asked to leave, we didn't leave. He asked us 3 times, and we didn't move. And he said, you all are under arrest. They took us out of the room and took us into a paddy wagon that they had sitting in the hot sun. This was a July afternoon in Jackson, Mississippi. And put us in there, slammed the door, locked it. That was when you really get the feeling that you're in custody. It's too late to do anything else at this point.
Where did they
And
take you?
let me just finish.
Sure.
We went to the city jail. They drove us through the streets, and there were these crowds. And as I was sitting there, waiting to be booked and have that mugshot taken, I looked around because I wanted to be aware of my surroundings. And on this wall in back of me was a large poster. It caught my attention because I recognized the face. It was Chief William Parker of the Los Angeles Police Department recruiting these redneck policemen to come to Los Angeles. And I'm sure that Jackson, Mississippi is not the only place where they sent that poster. As became evident later, years later, with Rodney King and those kinds of things.
And the Watts riot. 4 years later, there was a Watts riot
Yeah.
that was led by policemen whipping people in the black community, who I think were some of those people who had come from the South on those posters.
Anyway, I just want to say that at the moment that they took that picture, people have said to me, "What were you thinking?" I had just seen that poster. And like Stevie Wonder says in his song, I was amazed but not amused.
Please add to it.
I really want to tell you something that I think you've heard me tell you before. That couple was the only married couple that I know of that went on the Freedom Ride.
No, we were not the only
Well,
ones.
the only one from UCLA.
Yeah, the only ones from UCLA.
And, you know,
We were all free then.
courage, I want to say that courage and love very often are partners. And what I will remember most of all, probably on my Freedom Ride experience, well, maybe not most of all, but plenty, was when Helen got up to go to the paddy wagon, and Bob looked at her. I can still cry. I can still feel that love and that courage that brought you there. And Bob, your love, it just radiated, and your concern for your beautiful wife.
Thank you.
And she is the best looking of the Freedom Riders.
Yeah.
I was more afraid than she was. She had more courage than I did. I tried to talk her out of going because there were no, the secretary of the NAACP was a black woman who I was certain she was going to go, but her father said no, he wouldn't sign the papers. And then I knew that Helen was going to be the only black woman in the group, and I was afraid that once they segregated us by race and by gender, I knew she was going to be alone, and anything might have happened to her there. And I tried to talk her out of it, but of course, she won.
She didn't listen. If you could talk a little bit about what happened when you were taken from the jail. You were taken to Parchman, is that right? Parchman prison?
Well, that took a couple more days.
Okay. And when you got to Parchman, what happened? Where were you taken?
To maximum security.
Death row.
Death row.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit, you mentioned, Bob, and maybe, Rabbi, you can fill in, about what happened when you got to prison. There was racial segregation in the prison, is that right?
Yes.
So what happened when you got there? How were you separated?
Bob he didn't go to Parchman.
No,
It was-
this Bob.
No, I was asking that Bob.
This
Helen.
Bob, okay, right. Right.
Bob 1,
Okay.
Bob 2.
Okay. Bob 1. Well, first of all, they segregated us. Well, first we went to the city jail. As Helen said, they put us on the paddy wagons. We went to the city jail. And we spent a number of hours or days. That's where they booked us. It went by pretty fast, but I think it was we were there a couple of days, and then we went to the county jail. And the county jail, we wanted to fill the jails. They had to keep moving us because more Freedom Riders were coming in. When we went to Hines County Jail, we stayed there a couple of days, and then we went on then they took us to Parchman Penitentiary. And one of the points I want to make is that in that period of time, somebody was born. A young black man was born. August 4th, 1961, who later on became President of the United States. And we told him about that. And he said, I knew I was in my diapers, but I knew something was going on.
He said he might have been in it.
I want to actually encourage us to keep the conversation moving, and I want to ask, Joe, did you have something you wanted to add about, were you part of the group that went to
I was talking with
Parchman?
Max. The way we remembered it was we were arrested and we went to the city jail. And an interesting anecdote, there was a German correspondent for Der Spiegel And he happened to get arrested too, and I don't know what he was doing or how he got arrested, but somehow he ended up in the same tank we, the white guys, were in, and it was high up, the jail was high up in the police station or the courthouse or whatever, and he was all confused and concerned, and he had a roll of toilet paper, and somehow he had a pencil, so he was writing his notes and what he was going to correspond to his magazine on the toilet paper, and his organization, he wasn't part of the Freedom Rides because we went down there with the understanding we were going to stay in jail for a while, but his magazine bailed him out, and he was out immediately. But what happened was we had a sort of a mass trial, as I recall, and I don't remember much about it. And I've spent 50 years as a criminal lawyer, and it's in California, so I didn't know how Mississippi operates. But there was a quick trial, and we were all convicted and sentenced to, as I recall, 6 months. And part of what the Freedom Riders were supposed to do was pack the county jails of Hinds County. And so the county jail was pretty full. So what had happened was Hinds County had contracted with the state of Mississippi to use part of Parchman Farm, the state prison, as a county jail. So when we went to the state prison, the incarceration officer that was in charge of it was actually a Hinds County sheriff who was working with the state prison guards. And so the first place we went to was a place called Camp 11. And it was a brand new, never been used building before. And it was a low, this is the white guys.
That's where the white guys, the black guys.
And you guys were in maximum security.
We went to
So
maximum
the white
security.
guys, we went to, and we were in this place for about half our time. And our agreement with CORE was that we would go and stay in jail for 30 days, and then they would bail us out.
39 days.
39 days.
39 days? Right, okay. And then they would bail us out, because our sentence was 6 months. But when you bailed out and you filed notice of appeal, you got something known as a trial de novo. And
Could I interrupt and ask about this question about bail? Was
Please,
there a policy or a decision that you all had taken with regard to bail? And if you could,
Yes.
could you?
Actually, we
Well,
were
was
paying appeal bonds.
my understanding was that the United Auto Workers were putting up the money for the bail bonds.
I think it was
And-
appeal bonds, not bail bonds.
What?
We were putting up appeal bonds. We
Yeah,
agreed.
And then you got a trial de novo, which was in a court of record, where we had juries and it was a regular court.
So why weren't you bailed at the time you were arrested?
Because this was the goal of the Freedom Riders.
Okay.
Was to show, we're going to pack your jails with people like-minded to us who want to do what we were trying to
That's the
accomplish.
key question. CORE asked us to stay at least 39 days, because after 39 days, we would have had to serve the 4 months and $2,000 or 6 months. So most of us going to UCLA were committed to the 39 days, but we wanted to come back to school. So we got out by the 39th day. And one of the most difficult periods of time to a grade school, right. So, one of the really difficult times for us, I think for all of us, was waiting for the CORE attorneys to show up on that 39th day. Because if they didn't show up, we were in for 4 months.
Yes.
We were
yes.
committed to jail, no bail. That was started with the SNCC.
Can I add one thing? There was a guy who was with us,
Yeah.
Herbert Mann.
Yeah.
And he was much older than
He
us.
worked
He was
for the
like
post
50,
office.
and we were all 21. And he was a survivor of the Holocaust. And I don't know how he got up with our group. He had no, well, he was not associated with UCLA Freedom Riders, but he was in custody with us at the same time. And his commitment was, I'm going to do the whole
Yeah, he did the whole
4
thing.
months, 6 months. And he did. And he was a very cool guy.
Right.
And
Can I,
He worked for the
I
post
can I
learned-
ask a question about the conditions and about the situation of the black prisoners? Helen, were you with the men on death row? Or where were you held?
Say that again.
Where were you held? Were you held with the black men and put in maximum security on death row, or where
No,
were you held?
There were all females on our row.
Uh-huh.
I was in cell number 7. I had a black cellmate, female. In the next cell were supposed to be 2 white females. And that's how they separated the white from the black. We were all the women were on the same cell block, but they were separated in cells, 2 in each cell, 2 black, 2 white, 2 black, white. And I want to tell you that, I don't know if I should say this, but while we were in the mass trial that you referenced, they separated us again, of course. Whites on this side, blacks on this side of the courtroom. And just looking out at the courtroom, I saw that there was somebody in that white section who was not white. How did I know? Well, we know how to tell, you know. She was, anyway, when I got to the cell block, I saw that there were 2 white women in the cell block next to me, and I went into my cell. They clanged the doors, and the trustee left. And I saw that that was that girl sitting there in the white cell. So after everything got quiet, I went over to the wall and I said, "Hey." And she said, "Be cool." And
could I ask about did you all have any contact with any of the other inmates, the men on death row? What was that like?
There were no men on death row. It was empty. So and see, we were in this camp for the first 10, 15 days.
You were in the camp,
So
I
then,
guess
no, but
maybe
then
the
we
question-
went to MSU too,
Maximum security unit.
Maximum security.
But there were no general prisoners there other than Freedom Riders.
Okay.
So we had no contact with anybody.
We had contact with the prisoners before we went into maximum security, the white prisoners, because the prison was run by trustees, by prison trustees. They carried all the weapons. The guards didn't carry weapons. And most of them were quite confused why we volunteered to come to prison, you know.
But you know, Dr. Davis, we're talking about Parchman, but Bob, in a way, we were fortunate because we were in a secure situation. We were going to a penitentiary, wasn't fun, but it was secure. He went to Houston, and his story's different, and there was violence in Houston.
Well, I was coming actually to you, Bob, to talk about the differences between actually, because the rides did go to different locations. If you could talk about what happened when you went to Texas.
Right. I'd like to just go back a moment to the university. I'd just like to say that as I came to UCLA, I'd been in the Navy. I won a scholarship for NROTC program, and I was looking forward to a middle management job as a naval officer. And lo and behold, I came to campus, and I found myself, and I found you all. And by that I mean other students, administrators, people from all over the world with different points of view, and we were on this campus, UCLA, learning. Notwithstanding the problems of segregation in Westwood, because for me, life is life. That was Westwood. But there was still an environment on campus of learning and opportunity to strive for excellence, people who could be your colleagues in class. Some might not want to relate to you at all outside of class, but in class, there was just something about the camaraderie that's established between students and teachers, and students among themselves, and every now and then they have a wonderful opportunity as a student to meet a faculty person who could turn me on. And I had a great experience at UCLA that way as a student, and I cherish the years that I spent here. But during this time, this struggle, part of my responsibility in working with Bob and Helen in our own student activities was kind of a communication function. And I had the opportunity, once things began to pick up around 60 and going into 61, to be the fellow who made phone calls to other places to see what was going on. So I had an opportunity to talk to a Julian Bond about what was going on over there where those fellows were, and to talk with people in South Carolina about what their sit-ins were like and just provide that feedback here. And I want to acknowledge one of my fellow Freedom Riders, our fellow Freedom Riders, who's in the hall tonight, Tom Hayden, who went on a freedom ride. He was from the University of Michigan, went on a freedom ride someplace else. Because remember, the one that went to Parchman wasn't the only one. There were many. But we began to talk among ourselves as students. And it was another exhilarating experience for me to find out that as we had come of age to participate in this change, we had something to contribute ourselves, building camaraderie, talking by the old, well, I should say the old new technology called the watch line. Once upon a time, you had to make a local call or a long distance call, and there was this service called the WATS service. And through the use of the watch line, I made so many different kind of contacts to just help my team here on campus with others to be up to speed as to what other students were doing in other places. And things were different on the ride to Houston. California was, in a way, I believe, a fodder state, F-O-D-D-E-R. We put a lot of folks on trains, in planes, and in buses going down south during the summer of 1961 from UCLA, Berkeley, the colleges inland, Pitzer and Claremont. We were the place where the numbers were coming from in students in the Freedom Rides. And we had different experiences. What you hear most about with my colleagues here is about how Ross Barnett, that crazy man in Mississippi,
The governor.
yeah, the crazy man in Mississippi, conducted himself. I'm not using my words to say crazy, but there were white men, other governors, who were facing the challenge of students fighting segregation, who looked at what they did in Mississippi and said, not going to happen here. I went to jail in Texas, where that governor and its senator, LBJ, said, we are not going to have that in Texas. So the student activists in Houston, primarily out of Texas Southern University, organized in a group called the Progressive Youth Association, were getting no love from the media. I mean, the media was all over Parchman, but the media was not all over Houston or any other place in Texas. So the last group of Freedom Riders from Los Angeles were diverted to stop off in Houston, Texas, to go through the usual exercise. Get off the train, go into the station, go to the toilet, go to the general waiting room, go over to the restaurant, sit down, order. When the time comes, be prepared to stand up and be arrested, automatic. We were joined by our colleagues from Texas Southern University, and it was just like that. Off the train, into the station, arrest, down to the Harris County Jail, and process. The significant difference in the Texas experience, the Houston, Texas experience, was that Freedom Riders were not kept together. We went into the general population. Black males, black tank. Black females, black female tank. White females, white female tank. White males, white tanks. And in all of those places, find out later, they were waiting for us. In the black tank, male, after a brief conversation, the Texas Southern students that were in leadership positions explained to the men who were there what we were doing, why we were there, and we were welcomed as heroes, and we were treated accordingly by the black trustees. The black females, the same thing. The white females, mostly Jewish. I want to come back to that. We're in a situation where they engaged in conversation with these white women. And a decision was taken, a vote was taken in the white tank, female, and by just a couple of votes, the decision was, we will not beat them up. In the white male tank, it was clear that it was going to be difficult for the white males. 3 of the 4 Jewish. And shortly after they were in jail, they were beaten. They were brutalized. Steve McNichols, for those of you who might have known him, was so damaged by the beating he got, he was never the same for the rest of his life physically. Spirit was there, the participation in the struggle was there, but he was a damaged man. He had his spine injured, his shoulder, his back, his legs. Another, Robert Kaufman, had an extraordinarily large gash in his head, a great, big, beautiful gash. I say it that way because it photographed so well. Another, Steve Sansfield, who just died a couple of weeks ago, was likewise beaten. They were beaten bloody, and they were left to just lay on their mats because the white trustees were running the tank. And it was only when the lawyers who came in periodically to check on us, when they went down to the white tank, asked to have these young men come to the window so they could see them. And Robert Kaufman turned his head to show the caked up blood. And at that point, we were in there about 10 days or so, so they pulled all of us out. We were there to stay, jail, no bail, but it was vicious. The point is, what happened in the Texas newspapers? There was a small reference to these people who came from out of town and that we were arrested. And there was a small reference when we went to court. But in the meantime, all this drama took place, and there was the violence and there was the intimidation. But it didn't show up for the media, for the world to see, or for the rest of the people in Houston, Texas to see. The Texas governor made the comment about the Mississippi governor being crazy because he exposed the system in a way that helped its demise. And that's part of a distinction that took place. I think Tom Haven might say the same thing. I think he went to jail in Alabama or Georgia. And for others who went to jail in different states, there were different kinds of responses. But it was painful for our friends. What was it that I learned at UCLA when I was talking about meeting other people? It was important to me. As a Negro, I had not met that many Jewish people, Jewish students. I was aware of Jewish people in the community in which I was raised because I grew up in a community that was a transition from being Jewish to being Negro post-World War II as times changed. Everybody had an opportunity, everybody white had an opportunity to live in the suburbs, and we Negroes moved into parts of the city as the whites moved out. So it was in that context that I had met Jews in the first place. But here to be able to interact and talk with the Jewish students and professors, and to participate in programs sponsored by Hillel, University Religious Conference, the extraordinary program of the Wilshire Boulevard Temple, in having a camp called Camp Hess Kramer, which was established to provide educational opportunities for Jewish young people, into which Negroes, Latinos, and others were invited to come to just share the intercultural experience. And I went through that. So part of my experience at UCLA was the opportunity to break out of the silo.
That's
one of the most
really
enriching
important
things in my life, because it showed up in the Freedom Rides too.
But before that, when I cleaned up his closet, I found a short, but very small short. And I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, when I got out of prison, I sneaked it out for souvenir." He said, "Throw it out." I said, "No, this is a piece of the history. I am not going to throw it out." And he said, "Keep what you like." And I didn't know much about the African American history in America. I came here when I was 25 years old. I did not study American history. I did not live in that neighborhood. I had no clue. So one day when I watched the movie The Root, I said, this is what happened here. And it's only in the city, and I came in this country in the 75, and they treat us so well. Is it true? My husband said yes. And then he started educating me.
Talking with you
Talking about Freedom Rider. He was in prison in Parchman when his wife was pregnant, their first daughter. I said, and then he said he was in the cell by himself. In order for him to communicate with another prisoner, he used tapping.
tapping on
Yeah.
the wall.
And every night, he loved to sing the song, We Shall Overcome. And then he said, I love the Southern cooking too, the food in the South. And then I started learning, about the history of the Black people here. I was shocked, honestly. I was shocked about this is how we treat the Black people in this country. And then later on, when I became a social worker, and I chose to work with the disadvantaged population in downtown of Toledo, I made home visit almost every day to see these teenagers, how they live. I work with the teenager pregnancy program. And I saw so many cases just heartbroken, 15, 14 years old, have 2, 3 babies. They had no place to live.
Can I ask?
And then I learned from how the history said in this country between Black and white. And I found that I was so lucky. I didn't have to live through that. Yeah.
Rita, could you talk a little bit about Albert?
Yes. When Albert was in high school here in Los Angeles, he attended Manual Arts High School in Southwest Los Angeles. And at one point, the family moved to another neighborhood where Albert was actually eligible to attend Fairfax High School, which was a very good high school academically, where manual arts was becoming integrated and it was losing its patina. And when the family moved and Albert was eligible to go to Fairfax, he said, no, I have to stay here at Manual Arts in the school government. I am the school judge, and I have seen the situations that many of my colleagues, my schoolmates, have to deal with, and I feel that I owe them something to stay here. He had a commitment to remain at Manual Arts High School, which he did, and he never regretted it. He loved being the school judge, and he felt that he was, in a sense, helping these students better themselves by his nurturing them, which he did. And I wanted to say something else about Albert. He worked part-time as a gardener to support himself. I think it's in the program. And I never got a chance to talk to Albert after his experience at Parchman because he died before he came home. But I think I heard this story from Bob and Helen. Apparently, when they were sent to Parchman and it came time to separate the prisoners from white and Black, Albert had a very deep tan from working as a gardener. And the guard, trying to decide where to place him, said, are you white or Black? And apparently, according to Bob, Albert, I don't know if he said it to the guard, but he said, well, what does that say about your system?
One of the things that was very clear in talking with you all is that the objective of the Freedom Rides was very clear. It was to get the enforcement of the law as the decision as it related to segregation and interstate commerce. And as I understand it, as a result of the strategies and the focus, you actually succeeded within a space of relatively short period of time. The ride started in May, is that correct?
Right.
And by, within a year,
November.
by November, you had succeeded. It's part of the question, I guess, that hearkening back to sort of the framework of the panel, which is it's been framed as a journey to change from the Freedom Rides to Ferguson. I wanted to read you a passage of something that Martin Luther King said, and then ask you to react to it if you could. He said, "The Black Revolution is much more than a struggle for the rights of Negroes. It is forcing America to face all its interrelated flaws: racism, poverty, militarism, materialism. It is exposing evils that are rooted deeply in the whole structure of our society and suggests that radical reconstruction is the real issue to be faced." Assuming that you might agree with that, which may be a big assumption, but assuming that you do, and that the struggle against injustice is interrelated, would you nevertheless identify a major struggle now for justice in the current moment that you think is really important to focus on? And maybe I'll start with you, Bob, and just come down this way.
Well, there are a number of things that have happened since the Freedom Ride. See, you have to think of justice as being those scales that go up and down. And in fact, what we learned as Freedom Riders, and we learned it again, we learned it in the community before we even went on a Freedom Ride. I want to give a shout out before I forget, because I meant to do it before. We have here in the audience Henry Hodge, who was the National Vice Chairman of the Congress of Racial Equality and he lived in Los Angeles, but he had started with the Congress of Racial Equality even before he came here. And Mildred Walter, whose husband was the chairman of the Los Angeles Corps, he was also a national vice chairman. What we learned from them was that the backlash is going to occur. The moment we accomplished what we thought we were after, that was not the end of the effort. Because what happened then, of course, is that some of those people took off their pillowcases and began to plan how, now that what we accomplished in that short period of time, how they could begin to push it back. And they're pushing it back even now. I mean, I think the whole period during which Dr. King struggled to try to keep the activities that he was involved in, understood that we just needed the number of really committed people, the number of good people, the number of people who believed in equality to speak out. Once we outnumber, once those of us who are speaking out for real equality in this country, the way it's written up in the Constitution, that's when Dr. King's idea of the beloved community will come to pass. Too many of us just don't speak out enough. We need to outnumber those people who are working against us. They began to work against us the moment it was clear with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act that we were accomplishing what we were after. And they're still working at it. They're still putting themselves, they're organizing in such a way that you can't imagine that the amount of resources that they're putting behind it is buying off even black people. I mean, how did Clarence Thomas get on the Supreme Court? You know?
Helen, is there something you would identify as being a major human rights or civil rights question that you think is important to focus on now?
There are more issues than I can imagine. I'm often asked by students, what is my issue? What can I get involved in? And I really cannot be presumptuous enough to tell someone what their issue is. Should I tell them what I usually say?
No.
I'm sorry, what did she say? You're going to tell them the reason.
Yes.
Okay. You're a college student, you can deal with this. When I'm asked what is my issue, I just tell them whatever pisses you off. And that usually gets them to thinking. But Bob is right. There has been a systematic retrenchment, retreat from the progress that we've made. And as he mentioned, the moment that George H.W. Bush appointed Clarence Thomas to replace Thurgood Marshall, that was a kick in the face. That was definitely the beginning, or it was done to stop the momentum of the progress that we were making. And there are many other, I mean, just look at the Supreme Court today compared to the Supreme Court that decided in the Boynton case. The other George Bush has put three more people on the Supreme Court who are turning everything back. And it's not just for black people, not just the progress that we made with respect to equality and freedom, it's the economics of it. It's playing out every day with the decision of the Citizens United, which allows money to be called speech. Oh, give me that. And
Max, if you want to weigh in? I didn't mean to jump over you, but I just saw Max was leaning forward.
Well, I think it's important that you realize everybody knows the struggle must go on, but it is very important and it's a critical time in this country because our newly elected Congress is 80% white, 80% male, and 80% Christian. That does not represent the citizens of this country.
Rabbi.
I have a couple of things. You may have seen me just reach into my wallet and I pulled out this little card. What does that say?
R. Jess Brown, attorney at law, Washington, Vicksburg, Mississippi.
That was our attorney. And I'm telling you that because you may think we were courageous and to a maybe little tiny degree, but there were so many African Americans like Jess Brown, a black attorney from Vicksburg who defended us. They, in my opinion, were the real heroes. Amen. So as much as I appreciate being here and the honor, I just want you to remember that. I really appreciate your asking us, what's the passion for me? Or, for me, it's real easy. How many of you going to sleep tonight and are going to sleep in a bed? Is there anybody here who's not going to sleep in a bed tonight? In the United States, there are 100,000 homeless people. In Santa Cruz County, where I come from, there's 3,000 to 4,000 people who have no place to sleep at night. To me, that is a civil rights issue. And to a certain degree, it's a kind of racism against people who through many of them, not all, but many of whom through no fault of their own, because of the system, lost their homes. And now they're sleeping on the streets. So this is an issue. And it's an issue because it has to do with suffering. We were concerned about suffering people in the South being mistreated. There are suffering homeless people right now being mistreated. I want to quote, you may have heard that I'm a rabbi. I'm proud to be a rabbi. And I'm proud to be a rabbi because of this rabbi in particular. Rabbi Tarfon said, it's not up to you to finish a task all by yourself, some ethical obligation, but neither are you so free that you may desist from trying. That's our responsibility.
Bob, too, or Joe,
Well,
would you care to
Bob,
add?
too, I'd like to just throw out a challenge. Why would you ask us about the issues? Look, I'm pleased that young people are taking on a thing called Ferguson and focusing on this little piece called black people getting shot down. Glad they're doing it. Long time overdue. So what? I'm glad they're doing it. But it bothers me that I'm in my 70s and I'm still on the front line because a lot of people younger than me are not registered to vote. They don't turn out to vote. I mean, like you here, do you turn out to vote? Do you understand the issues in education? I supported a man for the Board of Education, George McKenna. The central piece that we talk about is education is a civil right. And you know, the voter turnout sucked.
Oh, God.
Here we are in 2015. And for those of you, I mean, once upon a time it was young men and young women. Do you know you're growing up in a war economy? Do you know you can go to war for something? Do you know that there was an era called the Vietnam War and people on this campus demonstrated and did all kinds of things, and you're just accepting another year of bombing and drones and whatever? Maybe the folks in the Middle East don't count, huh? But you're prepared to go. You're learning these skills and these insights and all this great competence to do what? To go to work. And you're going to work for the great American corporations that do what? They're going to make missiles, make drones, go out, be great capitalists. So, you know, I'm just so pleased that at least around the issue of Ferguson, and I do this as a challenge to you. It's not the UCLA students going and taking on the streets and the cops in Ferguson. It's men and women on the streets. It is working class people. It is a class distinction that all of a sudden is surfacing. And I would assume that those of you at UCLA, given the education I know that is presented here, do you note the distinction between who is being killed and who's not, and who's standing up for folks and who's not? And even those who are saying, you know, we talk about the cops and the rest of them, these white men are just poor people about as victimized as the people they shooting. And there's no one saying, look, how can you in good conscience shoot somebody black when he's a working person just like you? And just pay attention to the economic situation in the United States. I'd like to suggest that there are a lot of pieces out here, and I'd like to suggest that there are a lot of challenges for you. And this old guy with his gray hair would love to be able to just sit down and retire. I grew up in an era when there was an expectation that once I got to be my age, I could retire. But I can't because younger people are not stepping up to engage the issues, so I gotta still be active. There you go. There you go. There you go.
I understand that the mics have been queued so that we can take questions from the audience, but I want to allow if there's anybody on the panel that wants to make another comment before we open it up.
I just want to say what Bob said is get involved, but you can't just go out into the street and start making noise. You have to prepare yourself to understand how to get to yes. You need to understand that you're going to be in a negotiating situation, and you need to learn the skills of negotiating. You need to learn some of the skills that the politicians have. I'm an admirer of Rosa Parks, but she didn't just sit down on that bus that day. She prepared for it. She knew how to behave when it happened. And once the word got out that she had been arrested, Within 2 hours, the whole city was flooded with pamphlets because that whole town was prepared. They knew that one of these days they were going to have a case. And I must say, it was mostly women who prepared them.
Yeah. Yeah. Women like Mildred.
Are there questions from the audience? If you could stand and state your name and direct your question. In order for us to get as many as we can, I'm going to ask if you could keep your questions brief, and please make it a question.
Yes, right.
Is there a mic out there?
Make it a question.
There must be a mic.
I see one over there.
The mics are here and here.
While the folks come,
Yes, you can walk to the mic, if you could.
may I just make a statement while the folks
Please,
are coming?
absolutely.
I want to acknowledge the choir because they gave us tonight music in a way that reminds us that there's a place for those who write and who perform to help inspire and keep us going.
Music.
Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. I had a question about how your faith, if any of you are people of faith, how your faith influenced your decision to be involved and kept you involved.
Oh my gosh.
Your faith. People of faith, how did your faith
I think the
influence
question
you?
is how did your faith, if you are people of faith, how did your faith influence you to stay involved? And obviously, Rabbi, that might be one that you want to weigh in on.
Well, thank you. I kind of alluded to that with Rabbi Tarfon, but, you know, I'm a proud recipient of a great ethical tradition, the prophets. You should do justice and love mercy, and the Torah. Judaism is just so rich, as is so many wonderful religions, with a demand that we make a difference. In Judaism, we call that tikkun olam. It means helping repair the world. And so in my Freedom Rider talk, I talk about the fact that when I first heard about the Freedom Rides from Bob and Helen, I saw a flyer at UCLA. I went up to this guy and said, "What's this about?" Anyway, so I went to my rabbi, Albert Lewis, Alav Shalom, of Temple Isaiah in LA. And Rabbi Lewis said to me, he listened to me, asked the question, and then he said, "Phil, if I were in your shoes, I would go." And when I heard that from him, I knew I had to go because I had listened to a lot of his sermons about how we as individuals can make a difference for justice and righteousness.
Thank you. Is there a question here?
Hi. Hi, I'm Shamel Bell, and I'm here on behalf of Black Lives Matter LA and the Black Infinity Complex. I'm a first-year Ph.D. student in culture and performance, and I just want to take up your charge. I believe your name's Robert Farrell, doctor,
Yes.
I'm not sure. And to let you know that we are here, and we have stepped up. And so I just wanted to, what should I ask? No, I had to get up, and I don't really have a question, but I will say this. I actually found out about this event, and it said from the Freedom Rides to Ferguson. I didn't know what the event was about. And I contacted Denise, and she was lovely, and she got us involved. And I asked, did you guys contact Black Lives Matter Los Angeles? It's more than a hashtag. It's actually an organization and a movement. So I think that in the discussion, if it was from, you know, Ferguson to, what is the current context that we can kind of, you know, shift to? We would have liked to have been in the dialogue. So I just wanted to see what you felt about that, like, or give us any pointers and things like that.
I could respond to that one easily. You want to take the Cheryl? My comment would be, there's a march set for the 21st of this month. If you would read the Los Angeles Sentinel newspaper, you will see it highlighted and bannered there. Why don't the general press pick that up? There's some real things about life in reality. It ain't going to show up in the Times necessarily. You tune in and you'll find that this action is going on. I'd like to suggest that the folks at the Los Angeles Sentinel would welcome you to come and participate. It's going to be a march. It's being done in the name of something that you hold strongly. And one of the things I recall from our days was that if something showed up that was of interest to us, given our agenda, we showed up.
That's what we did.
Good. Good, good.
Could you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what are some of the key points that you've been trying to bring in terms of some of the activities that you've been engaged in?
She's an organizer.
Either of you.
Hi, I'll introduce myself. My name is Shay Dixon, and I'm with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles as well. Before I answer the question that you asked, I would like to ask the panel, these are three elders on the right hand in particular. Do you feel that there is a disconnect between your movement and our current movement? Because I know that the specific focus was about the Freedom Ride, but we didn't hear you all speak on anything about the current Black Lives Matter movement. And what was spoken was folks aren't doing anything, and we are doing a lot and have been active in Los Angeles as well as in Ferguson for the past 6 months consistently. We are aware of the march via the LA Sentinel as well. We actually attended the meeting at the Sentinel office this morning. But I asked the disconnect question because we would like for you to retire too, feel comfortable leaving the charge up to us, but I'm just curious to know if you feel that there's disconnect, or do you know what's currently going on?
No, there is no disconnect. We have been fighting this fight for at least 400 years.
Yes, ma'am.
And especially since the Civil War ended, what you have to fight, what you have to understand is, even though we keep struggling, as Bob said, we get pushback. And so, no, there's no disconnect. When you talk about Black Lives Matters and you're talking about police brutality and taking of Black lives, it connects all the way back to slavery, to lynchings, to the death penalty. When lynching was made illegal, they gave the white Southerner the death penalty. And to make sure that Black lives didn't matter. And you notice the disrepresentation of Blacks in the prison systems and going to the being executed.
Yes.
So, no, there's no disconnection. The struggle continues.
Absolutely.
Hashtag, the struggle continues.
I agree with you 100%. I didn't mean a disconnect in the struggle, because you're absolutely right, the struggle continues. I meant the disconnection between your movement, the movement of the 60s, the Freedom Ride, and what the movement work that's currently being done.
Well, I look forward to visiting with you, I think, Sunday afternoon at the Pan-African Film Festival. And part of that panel is about just what you're talking about right now. I don't have any family members at UCLA. I don't interact at UCLA right now. I have 2 granddaughters and I have hopes. But for right now, there is a big gap. It's generational.
Absolutely.
I live in a different part of town, and I think that as you all do what you do and the word gets out, we have the potential of bringing to bear the organizational ties and connections and insights and perhaps even wisdom that we can offer. But the bottom line is, this is your movement. I remember what we felt like, what we were doing when we were leadership. We acknowledged what was available coming from adults, but we had a sense that we were going to make our own decisions as students, guided by people like Mildred Walter and Henry Hodge. And I'd like to suggest that that's the same kind of a thing that ultimately you're going to do. So I think you are going to find that the resources are there, but we're looking for you to say to us, we welcome you, we'd like to have your insight, we'd like to have the benefits of your wisdom, we want your connections in terms of how to get things done at City Hall, we want to have connections to folks that you know who have money, who support causes such as ours, so that we can put those things before you, and then the initiative is rightfully yours, because you're the young people in leadership right now. It's not for us to lead your movement, but to be there and to be supportive of what you are prepared to do.
Ashe. Thank you very much.
Well said.
Can you just ask the question again, and I can speak to it? I just wanted to know you asked a question to us, and we wanted to quickly.
I think I was just asking a question if you wanted to share anything about some of the activities and interventions that you've been making, just as a way, because as Bob pointed out, Bob 1 and 2, actually, about some of the issues that sometimes actions occur and the media covers them not at all. And
Yes.
part of this has to do with using this maybe as a moment to share with the audience more broadly, as well as with us, some of the activities and interventions that you all have been seeking to make.
Yes, well, we actually just wrapped up an action where we camped out at the LAPD headquarters for 18 days straight. There was a young man named Ezel Ford who was murdered in August here in LA by 2 LAPD cops. And, you know, right now we're seeking for the District Attorney Jackie Lacey to file murder or manslaughter charges against both officers, as well as Chief Beck to fire the officers, because they're both still currently employed with the LAPD. We're paying them over $100,000 a year, you know, to basically go and come into our communities and kill our brothers, our sons, our uncles.
Our sisters, our aunts.
Everybody.
Yeah.
But it's not just Ezel Ford. You know, I can name a ton of folks in LA. This is local stuff. Kendrick McDade, Pasadena. He was murdered. Marlene Pinnock, she was just beat on the highway. We feel like the folks who are supposed to be representing us, Jackie Lacey, for instance, she's the district attorney, and she's supposed to prosecute on behalf of the public. They're not doing that. We've met with Jackie Lacey. We've also met with Chief Beck, and you know, our meetings are pretty much, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. Our hands are tied. And we know that they're our lives. So I want to request to these students, because I'm not a student here. So, you know, the elders on the stage, they're absolutely right when they ask you all to take charge, because like he said, this is our movement. This is your movement. Everybody in here, you know, and as long as we sit around and allow for our brothers and sisters, and even ourselves possibly, to be killed, that's what's gonna happen. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with Black Lives Matter. We have a very active chapter here in LA. So we are BLM LA on Twitter, or just find us on our website, which is Black Lives Matter, and we can loop you into the movement work that we're doing here locally.
Thank you.
Well,
You've been very patient.
Hi, first of all, let me just say thank you. I feel like, I'm sure many people here, extremely inspired and just honored to be graced with your presence. So thank you for coming here tonight and speaking with us.
You're welcome.
I just had to say that first and foremost. But my name is Shirley Giraldo, and I work here at UCLA as Social Justice Initiatives Coordinator. And prior to coming here, I used to work at a nonprofit with students from disadvantaged, first generation, you know, low-income backgrounds, the works against them. And one thing that I noticed there, it just almost seemed, and this is getting to the point that was made in terms about getting education and getting out and voting, some of my students, they seem to, it almost didn't seem to be cool, right, to get an education, to get ahead for one thing. I think coming here, I've noticed that there are just lots of things that prohibit people from progressing, and sometimes a lot of it is internalized, right? We all live in a system. People sometimes feel that they can't change things because they are paralyzed from what is going on. So I guess my question to you is I'm sure in your activities that you have encountered people who have perhaps internalized depression or who have felt paralyzed and felt that they couldn't make a difference. What are your words to those here who perhaps maybe are thinking that for this generation?
Well, I don't want to be the one who takes up the whole stage, but if we had your social media back in the day, you have tools that we would have killed for. We had a mimeograph machine. Bob Farrell and I forget who put up the most money, and a fellow named Jesse Morris. We had a mimeograph machine, and we could get all the paper we wanted from friends. And whenever we had an issue, we would run that mimeograph machine, and we had lots of secretaries on campus who would type our stencils with. You don't know what those are, but that's what you put on the mimeograph machine.
What those are.
And then we'd run out and we'd stuff the brew in boxes. People thought there was 1,000 of us stuffing those boxes. It was like 3 of us. But when we had an issue, we thought we had, again, good leadership in the community. We had Henry Hodge. We had Earl Walter, and we would go back and we would check with them. And we would ask them, we're thinking about setting up a picket line. We want to hook up with other people. We don't want to just set up one picket line. We don't think that's going to make a difference. What should we do? And these people, they had thought, they had plans that went way beyond what we were thinking. And as long as you go back, as long as you try to involve as many people as possible in what you're doing, you have to have posses. You don't do a lot with just a couple of people. You got to infect other people. The moment you start thinking about things, you got to, like Helen said, you got to start doing your homework. What are the laws? What are the institutions right now that are blocking us? There are a lot of good cops out there. Helen's brother is a cop, and he had the right mentality. But there are some bad cops out there. How do you isolate those bad cops? How do you make sure that there is, in fact, enough noise going on every time one of these bad cops does something so that it doesn't just die out? Well, you can't do it by yourself. You can't do it just as students. You get as many people as possible from the community. And like Bob Farrell said, you've got the news media, but you guys have something other than that. You have social media. People start following you when they see that you've done more thinking about these things than they have. And that posse, as it grows, makes a difference. People start noticing you. Some people will try to stop you. And as you keep on your issue, keep thinking more and more about it, people will recognize that you're articulating that in a way they wish they had thought about that. And they'll start following you. You'll get the workers to start separating from the drones. But you got to keep that movement going. You got to keep it alive. And the only way you're going to do that is to keep educating yourself about where is it going, where is it likely to go next, where is it likely to go after that. One of the things I really appreciated about Mildred's husband, he would sit quietly in the meetings when we would go to him, and he would sort of listen around until we thought we had something going, and then he would, because he was such a great listener, he would tell us, okay, so you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. You said you're going to do something. Before we knew it, we had an action plan. Then we would run out and we'd say how many people we could get to go to work with us in our action plan. And we found that they had posses themselves. What you got to do is you just got to keep spreading the word. And with social media, you can do it 1,000 times faster than we did it. And it's just a matter, really, again, like about thinking how do you put the education that you're getting here to work for real? Well, you think about those institutions that exist, what's wrong with them, talk about them, have buzz groups. You got these. We didn't even have all these residence halls when we were here, but you got these residence halls here, and you got to get those people off their butt. You got to go. You got to remind them that, hey, you know what? There are a lot of people out there who are hurting, who are not as well off as you are, And to the extent that we don't do something about it, our children and our children's children are going to be losers because we're sitting on our butt doing nothing.
I'm understanding that we have time for one more question because the choir is waiting to close us out. So I'm going to offer that after the event that there'll be time, hopefully, to engage the panelists one-on-one. I'm sorry to do that, but I'm getting the hook now. So one more question here.
A lot of pressure. My name is Melanie Vornado. I am a staff member for UCLA Communications. I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to spend time with us today because it allows us to connect to the history of the university. I didn't go here as a student, so these are things that invigorate me and get me excited to do the work that we do here. My question was actually reaching back, and I wanted to see if the panel could talk about their family's response to their participation in the movement, whether there was support or the lack thereof.
Did she say she wants to know what our family's support?
Yes, ma'am.
My family was scared to death, particularly my father. I come from an old movement family, and we had the FBI in front of our house for months at a time, 24 hours a day. So he figured that I would be sacrificed as soon as I got off the train. So it was very, very hard on my parents, and they suffered the whole time I was gone. They suffered more than I did in Mississippi.
When I was about 15 or 16, my mother told me about the NAACP standing in front of Woolworths, because at the time Woolworths department stores would only hire African Americans as custodians. And so we picketed the Woolworths in Santa Monica. My point is that I was fortunate. I came from parents who had this sense of empathy and compassion and a sense of rightness about what people needed to do in society. So my mom and dad were scared for me a little bit, but they were very supportive, and they allowed me to go feeling that I was doing the right thing, and that made a big difference to me.
My brother came to me before he decided to go on the Freedom Rides, and he had thought he wouldn't tell our mother that he was going. And he came to me and said, "Do you think I should tell Mother?" And I said, "You sure better." And he did, and my mother was very, very frightened for him because we were aware of the situation, and my father also. But they both came around and said, "You know, this is something you believe in, something you need to do, and we support you in your wish to heal the world," as it is said. But they were worried the whole time he was gone, and of course, his death and his never returning affected them for the rest of their lives. But we were all very proud of what he did, and couldn't tell him so. But
one of the things that helped a lot of our parents was the fact that Rabbi Perry Nussbaum of Jackson, Mississippi, would come up. Helen's got a great story about this. Would come up from Jackson to Parson Penitentiary, visit Freedom Riders, and write letters to our families telling our parents how we were doing.
yeah, I have a letter
So
from
that was
the
a
rabbi
big help.
that he wrote to my family.
Well, I'm the third child of a family of 8 children, and my mother lived my grandmother lived in Virginia, and every summer we would go down to visit her, and I would run into the segregation situation down there, and it bothered me. Like I said, I got pissed off. So when we went on the Freedom Rides, when we were planning to go on the Freedom Rides, we decided, since we were over 21, we didn't have to get permission from our parents. But we decided out of respect to give them a call and let them know that tomorrow morning we were going to catch a plane and join the Freedom Riders. Bob's mother eventually gave in because there wasn't anything she could do about it, but we could tell that she wasn't too happy about it. She was concerned because what he hasn't told you yet is that his mother would never let him go down south when he was growing up to visit their family because she said, you don't know how to behave down there. And he didn't understand, but later did. My mother had lived down there, and that's why we went down there. So when I called my mother, she wasn't too happy with it either because she knew what the danger was. And she said to me, why do you have to do this? And I, being young and smart-mouthed, I said, Mom, if you had done something, I wouldn't have to. All right.
And you're still alive.
What I didn't realize was that my mother had done something. The fact that she no longer lived in Virginia. She was one of those 600,000 people who had left the South and moved north so that her children wouldn't have to go through what she went through. And I appreciated her too late for that. But she gave a blessing. But what I didn't know until later, talking about support, was what my father said when I hung up. And I can't repeat it here. But he was really upset because my father was very protective of his family. And I'm, as I said, one of 8 children. I have 2 sisters and 5 brothers. And over time, living in the city, my father was very involved in politics of the city. He knew people in City Hall. But over time, one by one of my brothers or other was picked up for something or stopped and arrested. And my father could always go down to City Hall and say, that's my boy, let him out. When he learned that I was going to Mississippi, the reason he got so upset, because he didn't know anybody down there. He couldn't go down there and get his daughter out. And that was, I can't say he was supportive. He blamed it all on Bob.
It's always a good story.
Thank you all. It's absolutely been wonderful.
The Bob and Helen show. I knew it was going to be that.
Well, the audience likes to hear Kim-Ahn more than anyone.
The program will now conclude with a final song sung by the gospel choir from the balcony. Thank you for joining us tonight for this very special presentation.